Hello, and welcome to Esoterica and Nonsense, a podcast where we discuss myths, legends, folktales, fairy tales, supernatural phenomenon, and religions from around the world. I am your host, Annabelle, and today I am going to share a slightly irregular episode of the podcast. I am going to talk a little bit about my experience as a human being and the wild twists and turns that my life has taken that has led me to be able to do Akashic readings, past life readings, and energetic work, I should say. Sometimes this is hard for me to talk about because I almost sometimes judge myself as I'm speaking, and sometimes it just sounds so unbelievable and so wild, but these developments in my life have happened naturally through experiences, and I've shared my story with a lot of friends and a lot of clients, and I've been asked to share my experience on my podcast. And so, I'm feeling really nervous, but I think it's important to share. And I just want to be really open before I start that I am going to talk about some pretty dark things. So this is a trigger warning. I will be addressing sexual assault and domestic violence and some pretty hard topics that come up throughout my story. So I just really want to be clear before I start in case this is too much for you to take on. But let us begin. So basically, in the recent past year, in the year 2024, I've started getting really back into a meditation practice and meditating every day. And through that, I've been able to do medium work. I've been able to speak with people who have passed away. I've been able to speak with some of my family members, my friends' family members. I've been contacted by some ghosts. But I really just want to tell you my story because it wasn't always like this. And it's been a really long road. So a little bit about me. My name is Annabelle. I'm from the Bay Area. And when I was little, I was raised by a family that was by no means religious. But my family was, I think they thought of themselves as open-minded and were interested in the arts. So I was raised in a setting where I didn't subscribe to any religion, but I did feel that a lot of religions resonated with me in some of their ideals, mostly about kindness, charity, showing kindness to everyone. I understood these ideals as ancient philosophies, but I was always fascinated with folk tales and fairy tales and lore, and I was obsessed with fairies, and I had a feeling as a young child that I was an alien, mostly because I didn't feel like I belonged in my family, and I felt really different from them, and I felt as if they didn't understand me. So basically, when I was a young child, my mother struggled with alcohol use. But when I was young, I didn't really notice that. And now that I'm older, I do know that she was drinking. But there was times when I was around my mother that even during the day, I noticed very odd behavior in her. And specifically, I noticed that my mother would get very angry very easily and sometimes violent. And I would often avoid her. But my brother got a big portion of this abuse. And it was mostly like just kind of like losing her temper over nothing. But even as a young child, I remember being so confused because it was like her personality changed. Like her eyes would change, her body language would change. And she was a really scary person when she was angry. And sometimes I would talk with her about this when she would calm down, and it was like she couldn't remember. And I used to think that she was lying, actually. I thought that she like couldn't like sit with the truth, and so I thought she was lying. But essentially my brother was getting a big brunt of her physical and verbal abuse. And my brother started taking a lot of that out on me. So when I was around like 3, give or take, my brother and I kind of like began this cat and mouse dynamic. He was 18 months older than me. And sometimes I would instigate things. I would like steal a toy or something, but he would, chase me and often tie me up for hours and like hide me in a closet. He would, whatever, hit me and all these things. But this started at a really young age. And so I grew up being really used to this. And so I got really quick. I started running faster. I started trying to get more smart. I almost like enjoyed antagonizing him. So it became like what I expected from him as my brother. But obviously now that I'm older, looking back, a lot of the behavior was alarming. Specifically, I guess games that he would play with me where he would suffocate me and see how long I could go, before I would literally start having a panic attack, or he would, tie me up for hours. And what's alarming for me now as an adult was how much enjoyment he got out of it. But when I was young, I just thought that this is what all brothers do. And I think in a sense, people with siblings, like there is a certain extent of like harming each other. And I think there are elements of obviously him experiencing abuse and turning that on me. So I'm really just trying to report on the facts. I really don't want to diagnose my brother or vilify him. But one day when I was around 5 years old, give or take, my brother really pushed me past my breaking point. And I honestly don't even remember what it was. But I just physically lost control, and I became so angry with him that it was like I was hit by lightning. That's like the only way I can describe it. I became so overwhelmed with anger that my body started vibrating and I started trembling. And I felt something change within me. Like it really felt like a dark veil was pulled over my head and the world changed. And again, I was like 5 years old, so my brother was probably 6. We were little ass kids. But I remember as my energy changed, he looked me in the eye and ran away from me. And I didn't even touch him. I didn't say anything. And once he ran away, my first thought actually was that I was like drunk off this power. But then quickly afterwards, I realized that what had happened was not me. It really felt like something entered my body. And I knew nothing really I had really not been educated in things like demons or entity possessions or dark energies, but I deep down always knew that there were forces of light and forces of dark. And in that moment, I made a clear boundary that I wanted nothing to do with this. I did not want to take on this energy. This energy was not allowed inside of me. And I think what I said to myself is like, I do not want to be like my brother, and I do not want to be like my mom. This is not it. And that day, I remember thinking to myself, like, I wonder if this is the energy that goes inside of my mom and my brother, because they're weird. They were so fucking weird. I and it's hard to put into words. I mean, I think most of us have maybe dealt with people like this, but maybe not all of us have. But it's really hard to explain the energy shifts that happen within them. I think some people would call this like multiple personality. And I guess you could say that. I personally don't. I wouldn't call it that, but I'm not here to diagnose, okay? So, as my childhood continued, my brother started abusing me more and in different ways. And eventually it resulted in my brother molesting me over the course of around 5 years. And it was a really scary and difficult experience, because in some ways it was so terrifying and isolating, because I feared that if I told anyone that he would hurt me more. And I also feared that if I told someone that he would be imprisoned or get in so much trouble, and that would also be blamed on me. And I think it was also really hard because in some ways, not every instance, but in some instances, those were the moments where he was the kindest to me. But to be clear, not all of them, not every instance was kind at all. And so during this period of my life, understandably, I started dissociating. And I was also navigating elementary school. And in some of those years, I was navigating middle school. And so I was living in a place where people did not believe in spirits. People did not believe in entities. And so those thoughts I had as a child, where I had thought, perhaps there's something like deeper spiritually going on with my family, those thoughts left me behind. And I just found myself dissociating. And I actually lived with a lot of guilt for a lot of years, because I felt that it was my fault. And truthfully, like, this is so hard to talk about, because this was my brother. And I had to go to school with him, and everyone at my school knew who he was, and they knew who I was. And it was like, it was scary and it was embarrassing for me. And I just spent years telling myself that if I was stronger or more resilient, that I would have never allowed it to happen. And yeah, I really didn't know what to do. And it was really honestly like the most terrible few years of my life. And sadly, I know that I'm not alone. And I know that a lot of young children have dealt with similar experiences, some much more horrifying than mine. And it just breaks my heart. But okay. Let's take a break for 1 second. I'm going to burn a little bit of Palo Santo because I need a moment. Okay, so basically through middle school, my brother and I stopped spending time together, and I didn't really like being home, and neither did he. And so we didn't see each other as much, and we weren't spending very much time together at all. And eventually we ended up going to school away from home for at different times. So there was a few years where we barely saw each other. But eventually, in high school, we ended up going to the same school, and he was pursuing a career in being a professional athlete. And so through some turn of fate, my brother found a personal trainer who had gotten quite a few men into professional sports leagues, like, I don't know, the NFL and the NBA, and I don't know if there's any others, but this trainer was a really interesting cat, and he was also a Buddhist, and he studied Buddhist philosophy and Vedic philosophy. And when he started training my brother, he told him very seriously that if he really wanted to be a professional athlete, that he would have to not drink a drop of alcohol, not eat any refined sugar, and that he would have to start meditating. So in this year in high school, my brother was not eating sugar, he wasn't drinking, and he was doing Buddhist chants and Hindu chants for a few hours a night. And it was like he was a different person. It was like that he was like the kind version of my brother that I knew like maybe 10% of the time. And so for this short period, about 18 months in high school, I really thought, I felt a sense of relief because my brother finally was like a friend. And so I guess I told myself this story that like young children are just terrible, right? Like there's this phrase, boys will be boys. And I was just so happy to have a sibling, like my sibling. And we were talking about deep things, about the universe, and we respected each other and felt a lot of compassion for each other, that we had survived our childhood, which was really not easy all the time. And it was really sad. And so I felt like the weight of the world had been lifted off my shoulders, because this person who had once been my abuser, I basically kind of like let him off the hook in my mind, because I just saw him as an abused child who had been abused and was taking out his anger on me. And so I guess I had told myself and comforted myself that this is not who he was forever. So obviously, there are so many details, but to keep the story moving promptly, my brother ended up getting a sports-related injury in high school, which made it impossible for him to continue pursuing sports for college and possibly a professional career. And so pretty quickly after, my brother started drinking alcohol again, and pretty quickly I saw a change in him, but we were older, and so he wasn't abusing me by any means. But a lot of his behaviors changed, a lot of his like personal hygiene, the type of people he was spending a lot of time with and the girls he was dating, and the way that he was treating girls was always very, from my opinion, it felt a little bit exploitative and what's the word, like womanizing, I guess. But I was still adamantly desperate to have this version of my sibling that I always wanted, which was a sibling that I could depend on, And that was a friend. And so after high school, I ended up like working with my brother. And basically this was when weed was still illegal in California. And so he was brokering it around the West Coast, and I was growing weed. And through this time, I watched his mental health plummet like so fast. And for a few years, I was in total denial because I saw the best in him. And I needed it for my own safety. I needed him to be this like idealized version of himself, because I still hadn't really been able to process how traumatizing my childhood was. And so if he could be this version that was Buddhist and was kind and was contemplating the philosophical nature of the universe, it was easier for me to let go of my childhood. Whereas as he was almost reverting back to who he was, which was someone who didn't really seem to care about life, didn't care about human life or animal life, and didn't really care about women, and it seemed to show a lot of signs that he only cared about himself. I was telling myself that it was some kind of phase and blah, blah, blah. And eventually, of course, one night, I ended up getting in a fight with my brother, and he was holding a glass of bourbon, and I looked into his eyes, and I realized in that moment that his eyes were clouded over. They were dark and gray and like almost like someone with cataracts. Like they were his eyes were almost milky. And I realized that he was mentally ill. And so I realized I had to leave. And so I did. I left that night, and I've never seen him again. And that was about 8 or 9 years ago. And that's kind of when my life really began. Because not long after I left, I really started contemplating these feelings that I had had as a child, where I felt that my mother and my brother had multiple personalities. And it was like majority of the time they were these angry, scary, violent people. But there was like windows where the sun would peek through the... Do you hear the dogs barking? They always bark. They always bark. Oh my goodness. They're agreeing with me. So yeah, when I stopped seeing my brother and I cut him out of my life, that's when I really started contemplating spirituality more. And just for some context, actually, the dogs. Come on, you guys. There was a point in my life when I lived in a haunted house. I feel like I'm jumping everywhere. But when I was younger, my family ended up moving to quite a few different houses. And we did live in a house that was definitely haunted. And none of my family believed me, but I would hear people walking through the house. And there was definitely something going on in the attic. I always felt a presence in the attic. When I was in the attic, I would feel someone there with me. And once I heard like a demonic breathing in the house. Anyway, I could, this is like a whole other tangent, but my point is, growing up, I did have moments where I experienced spirits. Come on, dogs. Come on, Peppers. Will you guys stop barking for me? Thank you. Yes. And so now I'm in my early 20s. I'm living on my own. And I had researched throughout high school. I had done mushrooms a few times, and I had gotten really into esoteric books, and I was just consuming information about esotericism, shamanism, ancient religions, Hermeticism. I was learning about the Quadrivium principle. I was learning about sacred geometry, and I was just really trying to consume everything I could in high school. I was reading a lot of like Jungian books. And not long after I stopped talking to my brother, I actually did see a psychic woman. And she did tell me that there was like a dark spirit following me, and that it wasn't an entity possession, but it was like a dark cloud that wanted to possess me, and it like siphoned energy from me when I slept. And when she told me that, I immediately felt it resonate, because I feel this spirit. The spirit isn't my brother or my mom. It's something like bigger than them, but it's something that like I grew up with. It was in my house and it lived within them, but I knew that it was something bigger. And so I always like kept that in the back of my mind. And as the years went on, I started thinking more about it, because my mother's side of the family is of Viking descent. My mom is majority like Swedish, Norwegian, and then she has some Germanic and English blood as well. And I started really kind of doing the math, because the Viking people were going on raids and they were raping women and murdering people and stealing. And from my point of view, like that's exactly what dark magic is, right? It's like blood sacrifice, hurting things for the sport of hurting things. And like, especially like sexual abuse in my mind is not only a physical abuse, but it is an emotional, a mental, and a spiritual abuse. It is like taking so much from a person. And so for a person to do that, obviously they have to be sick, right? And so for an entire culture or like an entire group of men from like a Viking village to engage in these kinds of things, like says a lot about their culture and their state of health. So I just kind of started doing the math, and I had this intuition that perhaps one of my ancestors had maybe done some kind of dark magic and had created some kind of curse for our family. And I know this sounds wild, but this was just like an idea I had years and years ago in my early 20s. And at this point in my life, all I did when I would think about it is just imagine like a magical aura around me, like a magical force field protecting me. And I just wanted nothing to do with my family. And throughout this period, I was having like really interesting synchronicities happen to me. I started having visions that did start coming true. And a few times I actually did do medium work accidentally. One of the times I ended up moving to Guatemala for a short period of time. And in that time, I was out on the street smoking a spliff, and this Canadian guy walked up to me and asked if he could share it with me. And as a good stoner, I always share. So I ended up smoking this spliff with this stranger, and he told me the story of how he was named, and that he was his father chose his name, but his father died before he was born. And so he was telling me the story of why his father chose this name. And as he was telling me, I started seeing a man in my mind. It was so bizarre. It was almost like a Cheshire cat. Like I saw this smile. And he started talking to me in my mind. And so then I started telling this man what I was seeing, which was like a version of his father, I guess, in the spirit world. And I started telling him things that his father was telling me. and he started crying. It was wild. And after we finished our spliff, he went on his way and I never saw him again. And so things like this were happening all throughout my 20s, and so many other things were happening for me. But as I was getting older, it became more and more obvious that, of course, my mother and my brother are sick individuals and they've struggled with addiction and mental health issues. But I also personally became certain that there was also a spiritual component to this that, in my opinion, seemed ancestral. I forgot to mention that my mother's mother also had a really weird, dark energy about her. And her father, who I never met, had an odd struggle with addiction. And a lot of the men on that side of the family seem to have very odd behaviors and relationships to alcohol, and seem to exhibit similar behaviors where they like switch in and out of personalities. And it's really not multiple, it's really just two. It's kind of like a kind, regular human and then like a really scary person. So eventually, when I was, I think, 27 or 28, I got my first Akashic reading. And the first thing I asked her was about my brother and my mother. And specifically, I asked her if there was some kind of entity possession or curse on my mother's side of the family and how I could heal it. And what this woman told me was that I had an ancestor 7 generations back who did blood magic, who purposefully sacrificed a living being with the intention of summoning a dark spirit. And he did this knowingly, and basically, for lack of a better term, sold his soul to the devil. She was very clear with me that there is like no such thing as like the devil, but the phrase is a thing for a reason, because there are spirits that are parasitic and want to use the energy of humans for their benefit, mostly because humans are like never-ending batteries. To be a human means that you have a soul, and to have a soul means that you have an eternal battery. And so there are some beings who desire these batteries for whatever purposes. There's a whole long list of what they would use them for, but basically my ancestor, according to this woman, my ancestor sold a piece of his soul for power, and has basically he's been unable to reincarnate, and has become a parasite that lives off of my family. And when she told me this, I actually started crying, because I had spent so much of my life not sharing this with anyone, because I didn't want people to judge me or think I was making excuses for my family. And I just want to be clear that I don't think this is an excuse, but this was something that I sensed within me, something that I sensed in my core, that there was something very wrong with my family, and specifically my mom's side. And it's an energy that is not common. It is a very odd and bizarre energy that I just never felt right about. So when this woman shared this with me, I immediately felt relief. And she also told me that basically, like, my guides, my spirit guides, if you will, were really proud of me that I had successfully protected myself for so long, but that I should be really careful around that side of the family. And of course, I was kind of already on that page. But it wasn't until a few years later, which was actually this March 2024, one of my closest friends, Lore, bought me a tarot reading from this incredible person in Mexico. And the way that they read tarot is magical. They pull cards and they start channeling things. So he pulled a few cards, and immediately he told me that there is a spirit that follows me everywhere, and that it's a man. And so he started asking me, like, did you have a childhood boyfriend who passed away? And I said, no. I know exactly who this spirit is. It's my ancestor. And so this man continued to give me this reading, and he was telling me that this ancestor, in a way, is in love with me and doesn't want me to have romances. But he also told me that it was my, how do I say it? He basically told me that I had to help him move on. And that had never occurred to me. It had never occurred to me to help this spirit, this dark being who is my ancestor, to help him move on. And I actually thought that was really funny, because I had genuinely never considered that. And now that I'm reflecting on it, it is so funny, because my dream in my life has always been to be a compassionate person, and I never want to condemn or hate anyone. And I, believe me, have gone through periods of my life where I have hated people. I think my brother's a great example, but I want to, in a perfect world, I would love to see even the darkest of entities like find peace and find healing. And I believe that it is possible, maybe not in this life, but I believe that into infinity, that every living conscious being can find peace. So this is where it starts getting really crazy. So at this point, I'm living in Mexico, and I have some friends who live in the city with me who I started chatting with. And one of my friends, since moving to this region of Mexico, started having really interesting experiences astral projecting while he was asleep. And while he was asleep, he was astral projecting out of his body and helping spirits move on. And so he was telling me these stories, and it was happening without him trying. He would go to sleep, and while he was sleeping, he would leave his body. Excuse me. And he would end up going to other parts of the world or the spirit world, and he would meet with people and help them move on into other worlds. And so while he was telling me this, I started feeling really inspired, because I started thinking back to moments in my life where I had experienced spirits or been able to speak with ghosts or dead people without trying. And I thought to myself, what if I tried? I've never actually tried to do it. So if I can do it without trying, I'm sure I can do it with some effort. So at this point, I had just started The Artist's Way, which is a workbook. I highly recommend it to everyone. It's a workbook to ignite your creative self. And a big part of The Artist's Way is waking up every morning and writing 3 pages in your journal. So I started doing this, and I started writing to my ancestor directly, and I started stating intentions that I wanted for both of us. One was for me to always be in control of myself, and that no one or nothing can take any piece of my energy. But I also started making intentions for him, and specifically I started making intentions that my wish for him was to reclaim his soul, to reclaim the pieces of himself that he gave away. I told him that he had the ability to do so. And I also told him that I wished for him to be free. I wished for him to move on. and let go and to forgive himself for all of the scary things that he had done, because I'm sure he's done so many scary things that I don't know about. And so I did this for about 3 or 4 days where I wrote to him directly. And on the third or fourth day, I started getting visions. It was almost like he was speaking to me, but through visions, and he showed me memories. So I will share with you the memories he shared with me, but I just want to be honest that this is really, really dark stuff, and it's really fucked up. So if you need to, I would recommend fast forwarding if things like sexual assault is very triggering for you. So in a nutshell, the first thing that he showed me was a vision of him. It looked, I don't know. I haven't been to Sweden or Norway, but it looked like Sweden or Norway. There was a large grassy meadow and small cabins surrounded by fjords. And in this vision, I saw my ancestor, who was maybe like 5 or 6 years old, and he was bent over his mother's leg, and she was punishing him, and she was sodomizing him with an object. I'm not sure what the object was. I couldn't see that. And I honestly was mostly seeing this from my ancestor's perspective. So I actually was looking at his face in the scene, but I guess because he was showing it to me, like my whole focus was in his experience, and he was crying and screaming, and immediately everything kind of clicked to me, because I realized that my ancestor was actually just a really, really traumatized child who became a traumatized man. And so as I was having these visions, I was fully awake. So I was writing them down. It was like a stream of consciousness. I would write these visions down. And once I saw this vision, I started addressing him directly. And I was explaining to him about time and space, and that we have thousands and thousands of lives, and that in each life, our parents are not our real parents. They're more like our siblings. They're our parents for one life, maybe more if you choose. But that in this life, this mother was not his real mother. And I explained to him that his real mother was actually the universe, which is more like a river of energy, a river of pure consciousness. And I explained to him that he didn't need to hold on to these memories anymore, and that he could let go, and that it would actually be easier for him to let go of this life so that he could heal. And I could tell that he was basically addicted to this trauma, and he was so afraid that it's like he couldn't move on. And of course, I did know that he had probably like sold a piece of his energy, but that's like the first vision he showed me. And then the next day he showed me another vision where a group of young boys were sexually assaulting him, and they were laughing at him. And that was horrifying, because at that point, it seemed as if he had almost become used to it. And so he was still very much hurt, but he was not exhibiting the same amount of crying and screaming. And it was horrifying. It was horrifying. And so as I had this vision, I also wrote to him, and I don't know, I almost said all the things to him that I wish someone had told me as a young child while I was experiencing sexual abuse, that everything is going to be okay, and that these people, these things that happened to him have no reflection on who he is as a person, and that it's not his fault, and that it doesn't have to be like this forever, and that there are beings in the universe that love him and want to protect him. And so after all of this, the next day I wrote to him, and I saw another vision, And that's when everything really came into focus. And he showed me memories. It was almost like a montage, but he showed me memories of his experiences with this little girl, a girl who seemed to be about his age. And she was blonde and she looked like a little fairy. She was so super cute and nice. And he loved her. And when they were small children, they would play in the flowers in the springtime. And he just showed me these, I mean, it was honestly cinematic. He showed me these memories of this beautiful little girl running through these tall flowers and peeking at him through the flowers. And she was genuinely just such a kind, sweet person. And so he loved this girl because she was really the only person in his life who was kind to him. And so then he ended up showing me another memory where they were older, perhaps like 17 or 18, or like young adults. And this young girl was getting married to a different man. And they were in love with each other. Like, she was really happy. And on this day, my ancestor lost his mind. He snapped. He fucking snapped. And the same day of her wedding, he left and climbed this fjord and sacrificed a goat, and I think I think it was a goat for sure, and perhaps another animal, perhaps a bird, but he like full on used blood to write sigils in the earth, and like really did a full blood ritual to and summoned a spirit. And his emotion on that day was that it was like he wanted everyone to pay. It was like a revenge to everyone, to the whole world, because the whole world had betrayed him. That's how he felt. And so from that day on, it was like his life became murky. Like it's like he had fully dissociated and the spirit had lived through him. And even after his death, this spirit has basically been clinging on to my family because it so desperately wants to occupy a human body. And so after I saw all this, I was a little bit freaked out, but I also felt a huge sense of clarity. Because regardless if you believe in like the spiritual aspect, the details of the ancestry really helps me put into perspective like mental illness over generations, right? Because epigenetic trauma is real. And so if there is a culture that is abusing each other, hurting each other, murdering, sexual violence, like all these things live on in the genetic makeup and are passed down. So even a kind person who's well-adjusted may experience very odd emotions and memories that are passed through epigenetic information that sit oddly in the body, right? And so I'm just thinking about like my Viking ancestors and how there could be generations and generations and generations and generations of sexual violence and violence that is living on through my bloodline. And then if you also believe in the spiritual aspect, it really does help illuminate how nuanced this is, because it does manifest as a physical sickness, as a mental sickness, as an emotional sickness, but also a spiritual sickness. It's truly like a spiritual virus. It's not about that these people aren't accountable for their actions. Everything is a two-way street. But it's like a spiritual sickness, like a virus that has entered my family, and they have not had the tools or the self-awareness to recognize that they have been feeding this thing. And that is something that they have to make amends with in their own time. So that was kind of like the first step And eventually I did a ceremony with some friends. I did rapé or hape, which is a raw and powdered version of tobacco, which you inhale. And it is used to like clean your energy field and to sever your connections with spirits. And I have a friend who administers rapé, so I did some, and I had a ceremony for this ancestor, and I helped him find some peace. But what I do know is that, of course, like this ancestor did do some kind of dark magic, and it does live on with my family. And so I alone can't like lift this curse from my whole family. But since doing that, my maternal grandmother died, I think a month after I did the ceremony. And I've noticed a huge shift in some of the family members on that side of the family that I have spoken to. And truly, like, my dream for all of them is that they can find peace and happiness and find sobriety, real sobriety, because it's not really about like sobriety from alcohol. It's like sobriety of self, right? Being in touch with your body and self-aware. Because I think when we dissociate, that is like kind of what makes us the most vulnerable to spirits. And so this is like my personal story. This happened this year in 2024, and soon after I did this ritual for my ancestor, I started offering readings for friends, because I was in the practice of meditating every day and doing energy work. And I only work with entities with consent. And part of how I was able to help my ancestor, in a sense, pass on was that I started speaking with him and I got his consent. So I did start giving readings to some friends, and I did have some really interesting results. And I obviously have given readings to some friends, and I've seen really scary, like, sexual abuse in older generations. I've seen like medieval scenes of sexual abuse and physical violence. And I've seen how the legacy of what these ancestors experience be passed down generation through generation, either in a form of intense violence or in a form of intense dissociation. But I've also been able to do readings for friends where I meet some of their ancestors, and they're highly evolved people who are alchemists, magicians. And I've essentially, like, through meditation, I'm fully sober in this point in my life. And through daily meditation, I've been having the trippiest time of my life. And I have spoken to some family members who have passed away. I've spoken to some friends' family members who have passed away. And I've been able to travel through time and space and travel to other realms, Akashic realms, and speak to people. And I maybe that's something I could talk about on another episode, because I don't want to share other people's readings in detail, only because I haven't asked for their consent. But I felt, I felt the need to share my story, because it's so wild and seemingly implausible, and I think there was an older version of myself that would think that this sounds crazy. But since I've been sharing my story more openly, so many people have been telling me that they've had similar experiences in their life, either with family members or ex-lovers. And I just realized that when I was a child, I really wish that I had someone to talk to about this stuff. And I wish that I had access to a podcast or a video where someone shared with me their experience, because I spent so many of my years of my life thinking I was crazy. And I was afraid to share these ideas with people because I was also aware that for so many centuries, people who talked about these things were persecuted and called witches, and they were killed. And so I spent so much of my life hiding and not sharing my beliefs and sharing the things that I was seeing at home. And I don't want to shame myself because I was only trying to survive, but I really do hope to build a world for the younger generation where we can speak about these things and we can speak about abuse. And I don't want to condemn anyone. I want everyone to get help. And I understand at this point in reality, we don't have a lot of resources for people who are doing the abuse, especially things like sexual abuse. But I do think that with time and more spiritual development, we can find ways to help each other and at least help victims. But I also just want to invite everyone, like, it's not like you need to like do seances for yourself, but I do think it's really important to think about the legacy our ancestors have and how their DNA lives within us. And it's not about shunning them or running away from them. It's about really feeling your body. And when you feel your body, you can heal yourself. And when you can actually heal yourself, you are healing your entire ancestral line. I really do believe that. As above, so below. And if epigenetic trauma flows one way, by you untying these knots of trauma within yourself and within your own nervous system, you are then changing the legacy of what you pass on, be it to your children or to people you mentor or friends or whoever. So yeah, that's my story. If you listen to this whole thing, thank you so much. And if you have a similar story, I would love to hear. You can email in at esotericaandnonsense@gmail.com. I'm so appreciative of you, and I really hope that you take incredible care of yourself. I love you. Have a beautiful day.